The Caribbean Sea that day looked almost too calm, as if nature itself had decided to lift the curtain before the coming storm. The clear water reflected the morning sun, and the wind lazily combed through the waves, giving no hint that one of the most tense scenes in recent years was about to unfold here. But that is how it always happens. The loudest stories are born in the quietest moments, when no one suspects that tension is already tightening its knots beneath the surface. The long-standing political disagreements between the United States and Venezuela, layered like geological strata, had gradually created a fragile balance in which any spark could ignite a fire. Venezuela felt its voice was not being heard, that its heavy political breathing was not being taken seriously. And so when the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, a steel giant seemingly torn from a technological future, appeared on the horizon, Caracas saw an opportunity to make itself heard more loudly. For the United States, this ship is more than a floating base. It is a symbol that naval power remains a tool respected yesterday, today, and surely tomorrow. Its deck hosts fighter squadrons, radars, defense systems. Every detail a demonstration of decades of engineering tradition. It is legacy wrapped in armor and reactors, a new generation of weaponry carrying the weight of high politics. When Venezuelan patrol vessels began to shift a course, aligning themselves on a trajectory leading toward the aircraft carrier, it didn't look accidental. Their maneuver was careful, almost precise, yet unmistakably challenging, as if they were quietly saying, "We see you, and we want you to see us." U.S. Command noticed immediately. On the Ford's bridge, they switched to a step-by-step observation mode. No unnecessary moves, no sharp reactions, only the cold precision and restraint instilled in generations of officers who had served here before. The tension rose gradually, but steadily. It was felt not only aboard the Venezuelan boats, but also throughout the aircraft carrier itself. The crew sensed that familiar heavy air that always appears when both sides understand that any decision, even the smallest, can have consequences on international scale. Encounters like this rarely remain just lines in a report. They become signs, signals, hints used to rewrite the balance of power. Observers on the coast noted that the approach did not resemble a casual meeting on open water, but rather a confident advance of one player toward another, a much larger one. It was an attempt to demonstrate resolve, even at the risk it carried. And as in all such stories, both sides knew one simple truth. No one wants escalation, but no one wants to appear weak either, especially in a region where every move is studied by neighbors, allies, and rivals. And now, as the distance between the vessels shrank enough for the tension to feel almost physical, it became clear this day would not be ordinary. The Caribbean Sea, which had looked cheerfully lazy just that morning, transformed into an arena where history draws a deep breath before speaking its next loud and decisive word.
When the Venezuelan ships entered a confident crossing course, the very texture of the air seemed to change. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the ocean itself understood that what was beginning was not just a maneuver, but a true diplomatic duel played out through metal hulls and radio signals. The contrast between the sides was obvious, even to those watching the situation through satellite images. The Venezuelan vessels were smaller, more compact, yet their movements were bold and stubborn, as if years of accumulated frustration pulsed in their steel frames. Meanwhile, the massive Ford held its steady line, as though it had no intention of yielding even an inch. On the bridge of the American aircraft carrier, a tense calm prevailed, that special state familiar to people who have been through dozens of drills and know full well that this is not training. Orders were given in an even, clipped tone, without fuss. Controllers tracked trajectories, communications operators monitored signals, and officers on the upper deck scanned the horizon as if trying to read not the approaching ships, but the intentions hidden behind their course. In situations like this, the real enemy isn't the vessel itself, it's a misinterpretation. The Venezuelan crews, on the other hand, worked with a nervous energy bordering on battle fervor. For them, this moment was a chance to prove, to the world and to themselves, that their navy could assert its rights. On their bridges, commanders tried to maintain a confident expression, though deep down they knew they were playing a dangerous game against a far more powerful opponent. But such moments are precisely what formed the national impulse, later retold at rallies and on television. Between the ships, a kind of maritime dance slowly unfolded, not fast or chaotic, but tense, like an old dueling ritual where neither participant wants to fire the first shot. The Ford's course remained steady, as though it had no intention of yielding even an inch. The Venezuelan vessels edged closer, as though testing just how near they could approach before the aircraft carrier would mark its red line. In truth, neither side was moving ships, they were moving symbols. Every degree of course correction, every knot of speed, even the length of a radio pause, all carried meaning. Maritime geopolitics is much like chess, except here the pieces weigh tens of thousands of tons, and a mistake risks not the loss of a night, but an international crisis. Meanwhile, the aircraft carrier activated additional observation posts. Radars continued their steady, quiet work, like clockwork measuring the seconds before a potential clash of interests. Air crews were put on alert, but the aircraft remained secured on deck. A clear sign. The United States was ready, but did not intend to make the first move. On the Venezuelan ships, though it wasn't visible from the outside, the tension was rising as quickly as the midday heat. They understood that one overly sharp maneuver could prompt an American aircraft to take off, and that would move the situation to an entirely different level of pressure. On shore, analysts scrambled to predict the next step in live broadcasts. Some believed Venezuela was merely testing the U.S.'s readiness for dialogue. Others saw it as a test of resolve. Still others considered it a diversion from Caracas's domestic issues. But regardless of what experts thought, one thing was clear. At this moment, two fleets, two worldviews, two eras faced each other at visible distance. The movement continued. The ships smoothly passed one another, keeping their distance but not too much. It was a moment when no one wanted to yield, yet everyone feared making a move too reckless. In such moments, history seems to hold its breath, for any collision could spark escalation, while any gesture of goodwill could be seen as weakness. When the course crossing ended, neither side relaxed. The dance of steel giants was not over. It had simply entered its next phase, where the tension grew not through motion, but through anticipation. And as the ocean continued its lazy sway, the people on both fleets understood the most interesting part was still ahead.
When the approach maneuvers were completed, the situation did not ease. On the contrary, it entered the phase where the display of force stops being mere posturing and turns into a test of nerves. In such moments, every officer understands perfectly. It is not the ships that are drawing closer, but the potential consequences which, like two waves, may collide and swell into a far greater storm. The radio channels, quiet moments ago like an archival hall, suddenly filled with voices. The American side, maintaining a pointedly calm tone, transmitted a formal warning about acceptable distances and navigational safety regulations. The phrases were crisp, as if lifted straight from a diplomacy textbook, yet steel hid behind each word. The Venezuelan operators responded without hesitation. Their voices trembled not with fear, but with the overwhelmed tension that made every word sound almost like a challenge. They insisted on their right to be in these waters, on sovereign control, and on the claim that the aircraft carrier was violating a responsibility zone no one had really mentioned before. It felt as though definitions themselves were changing under the pressure of the moment. Aboard the Ford, communications officers recorded each word and passed the information to analytic teams. Any phrase could be interpreted in a way that would determine the next move. One poorly structured sentence, one ambiguous inflection, and a chain reaction could spiral in the wrong direction. Yet the carrier, a massive steel bastion, radiated confidence built on years of tradition. Do not panic. Do not give in to emotion. Do nothing unnecessary. Meanwhile, a very different mood reigned on the Venezuelan ships. Inside, the crews felt excitement and anxiety in equal measure. It resembled the moment before a race begins, when you know there is almost no way back and all that lays ahead is uncertainty. Commanders discussed possible scenarios: restrained escorting, a firm warning, a maneuver that would force the Americans to alter course. The situation felt absurdly taut, as if invisible walls surrounded them and every word crashed against them, unable to break through. And then the moment came when the distance between the ships became the smallest seen during the entire incident. It was the threshold which headquarters usually refer to as the point at which a maneuver is no longer safe. On the decks of the American aircraft carrier, standby teams were called to readiness, even though no formal order for escalation had been issued. Men and women stood at their posts, fingers steady, minds racing faster than usual. Let no one lose their composure now. In such seconds, every crew member realizes that while they may be just a cog in an enormous machine, that single cog is capable of altering the entire course of events. On the Venezuelan side, pressure from above was intensifying. Short, impulsive radio messages came through. Hold your course, do not yield, show resolve. There was a certain inner fracture in these orders, the desire to prove national steadfastness while not crossing the line that would begin a confrontation Venezuela clearly could not afford. But national pride is a stubborn force. It often drives one farther than cold calculation ever would. The Americans aboard the Ford saw this duality clearly. They weren't just tracking ships, they were reading psychology. Commanders understood that it was crucial not only to maintain physical distance, but emotional distance as well. Yield too much and it would be seen as weakness. Show too much rigidity and it might push the Venezuelan side into an irreversible step. And so, between these two abysses, the giant moved steadily forward, as if along a taut steel wire. Time dragged painfully. It felt as though the world had frozen, awaiting a decision no one wished to make. In such moments, history loves to whisper into people's ears, "Be careful, you are on the edge." And indeed, the moment came when even a bird flying past the deck might have seemed too loud a signal. And it was exactly then, in that almost symbolic instant, that both sides finally found themselves thinking the same thought. What happens if we go further? Where is the real point of no return? And it seemed each arrived at the same conclusion. It was far too close. Dangerously close.
When the tension reached its breaking point, like a string stretched so tight it vibrates at the slightest touch, everything suddenly unfolded in a way that matched none of the analysts' predictions. There was no abrupt turn, no loud performative maneuver, and certainly no provocative gesture. Instead, in a situation that seemed ready to explode, a strange, almost surreal moment of silence appeared. And it was this silence that proved decisive. The first signs of de-escalation came through the radio. The American side, which had maintained maximum restraint throughout the entire standoff, transmitted a message with wording that was simultaneously firm and crafted in a way that allowed the Venezuelans to exit gracefully without losing face. These were not phrases from diplomacy textbooks. Rather, they were meticulously measured words shaped by long years of practice. We acknowledge your presence, we will maintain our course, we seek no conflict. Clear, calm, confident, phrased so as not to invite escalation, yet not to imply concession. The Venezuelan reply did not come immediately. The pause stretched so long it felt as if the airwaves themselves had frozen. On their ships, heated discussions unfolded, though outwardly none of that could be seen. The question looming over them was simple yet heavy. How do you retreat without making it look like a retreat? How do you preserve dignity without sacrificing reason? In moments like this, national pride becomes a physical weight, and every commander feels it pressing on their shoulders. At last, the Venezuelan response came through. It was shorter than expected and far softer than many had predicted. It spoke of readiness to maintain navigational safety and avoid unnecessary incidents. The phrasing was crafted so it could be interpreted either as firmness or as concession, depending on who was meant to hear it. But the main point was undeniable. They had decided to lower the temperature.
The American aircraft carrier continued on its established course, slow, majestic, unwavering, as if the entire scene had been nothing more than a test. It passed without so much as a tremor in its hull. The Venezuelan ships gradually increased the distance, not sharply, not theatrically, but just enough to make it clear to everyone the incident was drawing to a close. Yet, a sense of closure never truly arrived. Instead, there emerged a strange feeling of incompleteness, as though someone had cut the music mid-measure, and this feeling, paradoxically, became the loudest outcome of the entire confrontation. When official reports began arriving in the headquarters of both countries, analysts worked almost round the clock. Some viewed the event as a victory for the United States. The carrier had not yielded an inch, had held its course, had demonstrated power without using force. Others argued the opposite, that Venezuela had won politically, having drawn the world's attention, demonstrated resolve, and shown it was willing to challenge even a giant. A third group saw the incident as a worrying signal. The region was becoming increasingly volatile, and even a minor misstep could trigger far more serious consequences. International news channels filled with heated debates. Some insisted it was a trivial episode that would be forgotten within a week. Others claimed it marked the beginning of a new period of instability in the Caribbean, and some pointed to a deeper meaning. The world had entered an era in which even small fleets and mid-sized nations could create moments with global implications. In the streets of Caracas, government supporters celebrated. To them, it looked like a show of strength. In Washington, officials discussed the need to reassess response protocols for such encounters. And in many Caribbean nations, less involved in global power games, people simply shook their heads. These things rarely end cleanly. They come back, sometimes years later. And indeed, the sense that this story had not put a period at the end was almost tangible. Yes, there had not been a collision. Yes, the incident had been contained. But a trace remained, a lingering vibration whispering, this was not an ending, it was a warning. Each participant stepped back, but everyone understood perfectly. Next time, the distance might be smaller, the nerves tighter, and the stakes higher. This episode was not a finale, but a chapter bound to have a continuation.
When the ships finally parted ways and the sea reclaimed its usual calm, leaving behind only a faint trail of waves, those involved in the incident felt a strange mixture of relief and lingering unease. No side had lost openly, yet no one forgot how close they had come to the line beyond which consequences spiral out of control. That day entered the chronicles not as a victory, but as a lesson. Strength and caution often walk hand in hand, and even the most formidable giants must reckon with small but determined challengers. Far off on the horizon, the sun was slowly setting, tinting the water in shades of gold and crimson. It seemed as though nature itself was safeguarding the peace, granting everyone a moment to breathe and rethink their actions. For the sailors, it was a day they would remember for the rest of their lives. A day when every maneuver, every word, and every glance across the bridge carried a weight far beyond ordinary measures. And the world kept turning, and perhaps someday history will bring these giants and the bold, smaller players together again in a new, even more tense dance. But today it ended, leaving behind not only a lingering wake of questions and tension, but also a quiet certainty. Sometimes greatness lies not in collision, but in the ability to step back at the right moment and wait for a resolution that comes not through force, but through wisdom.